Hello, I'm Landman. I'm Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Medical Imaging and Theranostics, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this Publishing Excellence webinar. Our aim today is to introduce you to our new journal, as well as share practical guidance for preparing your manuscript for submission. We hope you find this information useful and instructive. Our agenda today is to start with a bit of housekeeping for the webinar, and then I'll tell you all about the journal. Next, we'll discuss important guidelines and top tips for preparing your manuscript for submission. And then we'll tell you about our editorial processes to help you understand what happens to papers after submission and what happens after acceptance, and to demystify this process a bit. And then there will be plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. So on to housekeeping. You are welcome to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the webinar dashboard. Also on the dashboard, you will find a related resources box with links to helpful pages on thelancet.com, including our journal's About page, where you can find out more about the journal, and to our author resources page, where you can find useful information and documents to help ensure your publishing experience with us is as seamless as possible. If you wish to turn on closed captions or translations, please click the CC icon in the top right-hand corner of the webinar dashboard and select your preferred language from the options provided. Please note that the captions and translations are automatically generated and may not be entirely accurate. Once the webinar has ended, you will receive a link via email to the on-demand version, which you can watch at your convenience. At the end of the webinar, please complete our short feedback survey, which helps us improve our webinar offerings in the future. So joining me on the webinar today are Pierre Nauleau, my deputy editor, and Ankita Das, my senior editor. And I'm going to share a bit about our backgrounds and interests now so you can get to know us. So I'm based in London, and I became the founding editor-in-chief of the Lancet Medical Imaging and Theranostics in January this year. I began my editorial career as a senior editor at the Lancet Oncology in 2015, and then I became deputy editor in 2019. And then I spent a year as acting editor-in-chief of the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health from 2024 to 2025. I earned my PhD in cancer biology at MIT, and I did postdoctoral research in translational oncology at the University of California, San Francisco, and at University College London. And I also did postdoctoral research in neurodegenerative disease at the Medical Research Council in the UK before I joined the Lancet Group. I have a special interest in tumor imaging and theranostics, as well as access to care and health equity. Pierre is based in New York City. Before becoming deputy editor of the Lancet Medical Imaging and Theranostics, he was a senior editor for eBiomedicine, and then an agile senior editor for various journals at the Lancet Group. After a master's degree in medical imaging at Université Paris-Saclay, Pierre completed his PhD in acoustics at the Sorbonne, developing ultrasonic methods of characterization of bone properties. He then conducted postdoctoral research at Columbia University, focused on ultrasound elasticity imaging applied to cardiovascular diseases. Pierre is also interested in the environmental sustainability aspects of medical imaging. Ankita is also based in London with me, and before joining the Lancet Medical Imaging and Theranostics as a senior editor, she conducted postdoctoral research at Queen Mary University of London and Newcastle University, working in translational cardiovascular science and biomarker discovery. She holds a PhD in biological sciences and bioengineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, India, with prior training in biomedical engineering. Ankita's professional interests lie at the intersection of medical imaging, diagnostics, and translational research within high-impact clinical publishing. We are a full-time, in-house professional editor team, and we are responsible for the day-to-day running of the journal, the strategic vision and direction, all the content commissioning, and all the decision-making. We work collaboratively and are supported by many, many colleagues and teams globally. If you have any queries not covered here today, we will be pleased to help. Just email us at imaging@lancet.com and we'll get back to you. So we have launched the Lancet Medical Imaging Theranostics to serve the medical imaging community as an independent platform to discuss significant advances and challenges in imaging, to disseminate findings that improve clinical outcomes for patients, and facilitate collaboration among researchers, radiologists, and other medical imaging specialists, clinical specialists, technologists, and allied healthcare professionals. We'll publish our content online, which we call Online First, and in monthly online issues. And we'll publish a range of content types, including articles and review, as shown on this slide, and detailed in our information for authors. The journal is a gold open access journal. All content, including reviews and comments, is published under a gold open access license, but the article processing charge, or APC, only applies to full-length articles that are peer-reviewed. We are waiving the APC for all authors submitting to us before September 2nd this year. Once this date passes, as per the Lancet Group's policies, authors who do not have institutional or funding body support for APCs, we offer discounts and waivers as standard. All content in the journal is immediately and freely available online to anyone and published under a Creative Commons license. And this enables our authors to retain copyright of their work. To support the costs of publishing, authors who choose to publish OA in our journals pay the APC upon acceptance. The APC can be paid by the author, by the institution, or the funding body. We believe ability to pay should never be a barrier to publication. So as I mentioned, there are several options available to authors to support publishing fees. So this is our scope. We invite submissions of original research, review, and opinion that will directly impact, advocate change in, or illuminate clinical practice and health policy in medical imaging. The scope of the journal is very broad, and it covers clinical research in all imaging modalities, some of which I've listed here. It includes diagnostic and interventional radiology, nuclear medicine, and theranostics. It also covers all medical specialties, only a small selection of which is listed here, and the whole spectrum from health to disease, from screening to diagnosis to treatment. And we want to publish cross-disciplinary clinical research that's of interest and relevance to everyone working in medical imaging. I want to highlight 3 areas of our scope that are important to our mission as a journal and what I believe sets us apart from other radiology journals. The first is that we're interested in studies that provide clinical or technological advances. So that means work where the clinical advance is underpinned by imaging, or work where a technological advance in an imaging technique will drive improved clinical outcomes. Second, we really want to foster and be a forum for discussion, debate, and most importantly, collaboration among everyone working in medical imaging. And we want to represent and serve the broad imaging community. And finally, we want to ensure that we are highlighting challenges and solutions related to equitable access to safe and affordable imaging, as well as sustainability of medical imaging. So we will publish 3 main content types: opinion and discussion in our editorial, comment, and correspondence sections, original research articles, and reviews and reports, including narrative and systematic reviews, personal views, health policy pieces, and future series and commissions. Our research priorities are at the top of the evidence pyramid, like randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses, but we are open to most study types, as well as secondary and post-hoc analyses of trials and studies with imaging, rather than clinical endpoints. However, it's important to point out that we will not publish any preclinical work. So that means anything involving cells or animals, and we won't publish methodological studies. So that's technical or computational research, for example, scanner development or processing or acquisition software. Our International Advisory Board consists of key opinion leaders and researchers from around the world who lend their expertise to the journal. The board offer us subject-specific and discipline-specific guidance and other types of advice on an ad hoc basis when we request it. Board members have no formal involvement in content selection or in any part of the peer review process. They also do not have editorial oversight of any section of the journal. Board members are occasionally invited to peer review individual submissions at our request, and any submissions that are authored by an advisory board member are handled solely by our in-house editorial team according to our standard editorial processes. And you can see more information about our advisory board on our website. And now I'll hand you over to Pierre, who will take you through essentials for preparing your manuscript.
I would like now to give you some tips on how to prepare your manuscript to give it the best chance at being appreciated by the editors and potentially reviewers. This is general advice that applies to us, but also to all the Lancet journals as well. The tips I will share today are bits and pieces taken from our information for authors. It is a document that you can access on our website or in the webinar dashboard, and that extensively cover all you need to know before submitting. What article types we publish, the word limit, the different forms that are required, and we provide links to the relevant checklists and guidelines that we recommend using. Please note that we do not require any special formatting at submissions, but following the guidelines ensures a smoother process. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you want your manuscript to be understood by the editors and reviewers. So for this, you need to make sure that the methods and the results are reported accurately and objectively, that the implications of the finding are not overstated, and that the jargon specific to your field is explained, and that your paper has a logical flow. It can be really useful to ask colleagues to read through your manuscript to ensure it can be understood by readers outside the directory of your research. The first thing that we will see in the editorial manager system when we receive an article is the title of the article. So it needs to be effective. It needs to attract the reader's attention while providing an accurate description of your work. It shouldn't be a declamatory phrase stating the results. It should be concise, and it should clearly include a description of the study type. The title is, of course, important for the readers to catch attention, but a good title will also help ensure that search engines can find your article for researchers that might be interested in your work. After the title, we will read your cover letter. The cover letter should convince us to consider your article for peer review. It needs to clearly convey the importance of your manuscript. So for this, you need to highlight the novelty and or the advance in terms of technical aspects or clinical implication. It's not helpful to repeat the abstract in the cover letter, so you can avoid that. You should also make the case why you choose our journal over other available options. And to finish, we recommend to explain the context by indicating whether the paper has been presented or will be presented at a conference, or whether you had previously discussed the paper with editors, so we can keep track of that. Then we will look at a panel called Research in Context. So for all primary research articles, the Lancet Group requires authors to provide a brief overview of the study findings in the context of the existing evidence. These panels will be useful for the editors and reviewers to understand the potential impact of your manuscript, but they are especially important in published articles to broaden the readership, as they will explain concisely how your study contributes to the broader body of knowledge and its implication. And we think it's especially important for a multidisciplinary journal like ours. More details about what should be included in each section of these panels are available in our information for authors. After that, we will move to the abstract. So we ask for a structured abstract with 4 sections. The background, in which you will briefly set the context of the study and state the goal of the study. Methods, that should clearly but concisely describe what was done. The findings section should report the key data with an indication of precision, so readers can evaluate the strength of the evidence. And finally, the interpretation section should explain the implications of your work. Now let's go through the different parts of the manuscript itself. So the introduction should answer 3 questions. What problems are you addressing? Where does the field stand on that question? And what is the specific aim of the study? The introduction doesn't need to be long, but it needs to cover fairly the current state of the field. Then in your method section, the main thing to keep in mind when you prepare it is to give all the details so the study can be correctly interpreted and eventually reproduced. It means that the study design and the procedures are well reported. The study population is fully described in the text and in tables or flowcharts. Additional exploratory analysis should be clearly labeled as such. A separate section will be required to present in full all the statistical analysis tools that you used. And to assist you with choosing what to report in the manuscript versus what to keep in an appendix, reporting guidelines and checklists are most useful tool. Finally, the information in the method should also help the reader appreciate how the study was conducted, with indication of ethical approval, patient consent, and the role of funding source. For the results section, you should make sure that each of your figures and table is clear and useful, and refer to them in the text. Each result discussed in this section should have a corresponding method presented in the previous section. To help the readers appreciate the strength of the findings, please include actual numbers in addition to the percentages and give an indication of precision in the form of interquartile range or confidence interval. In this section, you should only report investigations done in the current study and put the emphasis on the primary aim of the study. Exploratory analyses are allowed, but shouldn't take most of the section. And finally, the results section is not the place to interpret or speculate on the findings, because this is the role of the discussion section. It's a very important part of the manuscript, because that's where you get to persuade the reader of the value of your research. The discussion should not simply repeat the results, and it should not go beyond what the results can support. You should compare the findings with other published results, explain potential discrepancies, and discuss implications. One important thing is not to ignore work that doesn't align with your findings. You should instead confront it and try to persuade the reader that your findings are stronger for X, Y, or Z reason. And the discussion should end with a summary of the strength and limitation. We know it can be hard to critique one's own work, but being transparent about the weaknesses of the study show that you have considered them in your interpretation of the results, and it will also provide you with an opportunity to suggest future area of research. Finally, at the end of the manuscript, you should include a few administrative sections. Author contributions describe how each author contributed to the work, and we encourage authors to follow ICMG guidelines for authorship inclusion. Then under a subheading for declaration of interest, all authors must disclose any financial and personal relationship with other people or organization, even if it doesn't directly relate to the submitted work. The data sharing statement will then be used to indicate how the dataset and codes used in the study can be accessed. And as an open access journal, we strongly recommend that codes and dataset are shared openly and in a meaningful way on separate platforms like GitHub or Zenodo when possible. In the acknowledgement section, you have one short paragraph to mention those who assisted in the research but didn't qualify for authorship, such as funders, proofreaders, suppliers, advisor, or undergraduate students. After that, you will find the references section, and we ask you to carefully check them before submission, because we have noticed that this is where many mistakes are made. And another advice is that you should avoid excessive citations of your work, because the list of references is a way for editors and reviewers and readers to know that you have considered all the relevant literature and not just your own research. Finally, you can provide additional methodological descriptions or presentation of secondary analysis in a supplementary appendix that will be attached as a PDF to the manuscript if your manuscript is published. And I will now let Ankita guide you through our editorial processes.
Thank you, Pierre, and hi everyone. Today I will talk about the editorial processes, which we follow at the Lancet Group. Each manuscript submitted is treated individually, but most research papers follow a similar path from submission through editorial and peer review to production and publication and beyond. Every day, we assess manuscripts submitted to our journal based on discussion within the team and occasional feedback from other Lancet colleagues. This forms our internal review process, after which we decide which manuscripts to take forward for peer review. I'll cover the editorial considerations in more detail shortly. External peer review will only take place after the manuscript is scrutinized internally. Many papers will be turned away after in-house assessment, and we try to communicate this decision to authors as soon as possible. We then identify and invite appropriate external peer reviewers, oversee the review and revision process for each manuscript while being in touch with reviewers and authors. Once we get the reviews back, we make the final decision on whether to reject, publish, or offer a transfer to another journal. Throughout each stage that a manuscript progresses, we conduct quality checks and ensure alignment with our policies. We work in close partnership with authors to check the paper and analysis, put your findings into context, and ultimately improve how clearly the message is communicated towards achieving the impact your paper deserves. In addition to overseeing the manuscripts, we also commission all types of content, write editorials, and interact with the broader research community by attending conferences, seminars, and arranging institute visits. Decisions are made by us, the editors, and can be made at all stages of the review process, that is, at submission and after each round of review. We base our decisions on whether to reject, offer a transfer to another journal, or accept manuscripts on relevant thresholds. We first see whether the manuscript fits into our scope and is relevant for our target audience. We then assess whether this work is novel, that is, someone has looked at it for the first time, or is there a substantial advance over existing literature. The methods need to be robust to ensure generalizability and provide strong support for conclusions to increase the impact of the study. This can be in terms of inspiring further research, changing practice, or influencing policy. Peer review plays an important role in ensuring the integrity of the scientific record. After successful initial editorial assessment, manuscripts are sent to 4 external peer reviewers. 3 of them have technical or clinical expertise, and 1 is a statistical specialist. In some cases, depending on the manuscript, we might also include other experts such as modelers, data scientists, health economists, or from different career stage. The peer review process is single-blinded, which means authors never know who reviewed their paper. We try to include experts to cover all aspects of the paper and provide in-depth critique, especially for multidisciplinary studies. We avoid biased reviews by carefully checking reviewer conflicts of interest, which may arise due to previous co-publications or academic engagements. As much as possible, we maintain our geographical and gender diversity in inviting reviewers as well. After getting the reviews in, we first discuss internally and then go to a Lancet-wide editorial meeting to get opinions from other colleagues. All peer review comments are then shared with the authors. Often authors might disagree with peer reviewers, and reviewers might provide conflicting comments. It's our role as editors to mediate this process. Lastly, before formal acceptance, we check that all necessary paperwork is in, like author contribution forms, conflict of interest declarations, and ethical approvals. If your manuscript has passed both internal and external review, congrats to the authors. You are now one step closer to publication. All accepted articles are now handled by your production team. They ensure high-quality scientific and technical editing is provided as they begin to work on the manuscript, and the internal review continues, but now with a magnifying glass. Our illustrators will read out the figures and graphs, and assistant editors will edit the accepted manuscript to ensure Lancet style formatting, clarity and readability, and fair interpretation of the findings. We work closely with our authors and our internal teams throughout this time to format the manuscript into the best possible paper, accurate and clear for an international audience. For research articles, we might commission a linked content in which an independent expert provides an outside perspective and helps explain the work in the broader context of the field. The Lancet Group sees its responsibility for scientific integrity as extending beyond publication. It also promotes responsible communication of research findings, aiming for accurate and fair representation beyond the pages of its journals. Authors can consider us as both a destination for publication and a platform to advance the global impact of their research. We can work with you and your affiliated institutions to achieve that because the Lancet.com and Science Direct have an extensive global reach with over millions of annual visits. For authors presenting their original research at conferences, we will work with you to coordinate simultaneous publication under embargo, which can be further supported by our Bespoke Alerts program with millions of subscriptions. We have millions of followers across major global social media platforms from LinkedIn to Blue Sky, YouTube, as well as WeChat and Weibo. Research published in Lancet journals receives regular coverage in influential media such as the Associated Press, BBC, CNN, The Times of India, Financial Times, Reuters, The Guardian, El País, The New York Times, O Globo, NPR, and The Washington Post. In the near future, we will launch our podcast that will give us and our audience an opportunity to delve deeper into selected works and discuss clinical and policy implications with authors themselves. Research invites debate, which is encouraged and often published in our issues over the weeks and months following publication. We continue to monitor the impact of science we publish, encourage follow-up studies, track developments in the field, and to champion the application of valuable knowledge for real-world change. I would now like to pass on to Ali for any final remarks before we open the floor for discussion.
Thanks, Ankita. So that's the end of our presentation, but now we'll open the floor for Q&A. And I'm happy to say that there are quite a few questions in here for us, so that's great. Thank you for your engagement. So I'm going to start with a question that's around our turnaround times. The question is, what's the median time to desk rejection or invite for peer review? So we don't have any median times yet. We don't have quite enough submissions yet, but I can say that what our aims are. So we aim to make a first decision on a manuscript, that is to either reject or to invite peer reviewers within about 3 days. After that, what we're aiming for is a time from submission to sort of that second decision post peer review of about a month. But of course, that depends on a lot of things, the complexity of the paper itself, the willingness of reviewers to agree to review, and then of course deliver those reviews. And then our aim for submission to acceptance is about 2 to 3 months, and that's based on the reviewers as well as the authors responding to reviewer requests. So I hope that answers your question. So the next question asks whether we consider accepting manuscripts for that first review in a generic format and then ask authors to edit to our style if we're planning to send it to peer review. So I think, Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, we presented you like the ideal manuscript, but we understand that you might not have followed everything or didn't prepare. But we will consider all type of presentations. Like it's not important for the formatting. We really focus on the novelty and the advance and the clarity of presentation. And then we will work with you regarding formatting at the later stage if we consider it for publication.
So another question that we have is about indexing. This is obviously an important question that's on people's minds. So to be indexed by an indexing body like Claravit, Scopus, Medline, Embase, you have to meet an important set of requirements. And as we meet those requirements, we'll be applying for indexing by those bodies. But it can take some time to get those, but we'll be doing that as it happens. It often depends on the number of papers that you've published, as well as the amount of time that you've been publishing. So another question is related to authorship, whether we would accept, for example, global consortium as authors. Ankita, would you like to take that one?
I could start, but Ali, I think you're more versed with this kind of authorship, so it would be better if you start, then I can add on.
Sure. Yes. So yes, we will accept consortium authors. Sometimes that can be as what's the word I'm looking for? As a study group. So there'll be individual authors. And then an additional authors as a study group. Sometimes the entire author byline could be a consortium, and that's okay. Does anyone have anything to add to that one? Okay, we'll move on. So. Another question is about defining an important clinical implication of a novel medical imaging device used during surgery. So I think this is a very specific question about medical imaging device and used during surgery, but I think I can speak to what we think of as an important clinical advance that's underpinned by imaging, or it can be generalized. So the idea here is that the clinical advance might be that using this new imaging device means that the surgery might be faster. It might be more accurate. For example, in a cancer situation, might be better at identifying all of the cancer tissue and removing all of it. It could be a patient-centered advance, such as shorter surgery or less invasive surgery. So all of those would be considered clinical advances that were underpinned by this new medical device. Okay, here I've got another question here. Sorry, it's okay. This question is, if we have a study that's not recruiting our own data sets, but uses public data sets, would that be considered by the journal? Ankita, why don't you take this one?
Yes, definitely. It's not that you have to have your own data set, which many authors don't have, but yes, you can use public data sets for your analysis, and you can have multiple kinds of analysis done, and you can have imaging conclusions. There are many public data sets available who have regular imaging modalities incorporated in those. So you can have those kinds of data sets, do the analysis what you want, and then represent your answers. So that's perfectly acceptable for our journal. But yes, you should acknowledge the data set correctly and use it properly.
So this question is, in the letter or correspondence format, can it relate to a current topical issue in medical imaging, or does it have to be a response to a specific research article? Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So it can be both. We consider both types. So we have actually three types. The first one is we commission some comments in response to a specific research article we publish, because we want to broaden the readership and to explain the implications. So we invite an expert. Then it can be just a letter of anyone who want to react to a specific research article, and then it can be sort of a correspondence or a comment on an important topic, on a hot topic, and we will consider that as well. So you're welcome to submit that to us.
So I see a few questions about using AI tools. So I think that's a really important one that I'll answer. So I want to start by saying that, we understand that AI, from everything from machine learning to generative AI, is really important and essential in radiology and in medical imaging. I think that this field has really embraced technology and embraced AI, and I think that's great. So if you're using AI in your research, then that's absolutely fine and encouraged, and it just needs to be reported transparently. Things like the model that was used, and the any information about any technical information about the software and the coding, that would be really important to report in the manuscript. When it comes to writing the manuscript, we are happy for authors to use AI to help them with language, with grammar, with structuring their manuscript. That's perfectly fine, and we understand that that can be really helpful if English is not your primary language. However, what is not permitted is having AI to write the paper for you. So you can't use AI to write your first draft. We want the insights and the synthesis and the interpretation to come from you. We don't accept AI use for making figures or for analyzing data or for interpreting the data. So that's a restricted use of AI there for authors. We also have a restricted use of AI for reviewers. So we're happy, again, this is similar after writing your review comments. If you want to fix the language or the grammar or help with organization or structure of that review, that's fine. You can use AI for that. But it is not permitted to use AI to write that review, and it is especially not acceptable to input a manuscript into an AI. That's a breach of confidentiality because we don't know what those AI models are doing with that data. So that's not allowed. And editors themselves follow the same rules for AI use. Okay, so let's see. We've got a question about the APC, or the article processing charge. Ankita, would you like to take that one?
Yes, I think there are a few questions about the fees and some discounts as well. So I'll just give a combined answer for our APCs. So we launched on 2nd February. So our APCs are waived all till the first 6 months, that is till 2nd of September. So there's no charge for publishing your paper if you submit before that. And after that, our APC is $7,800 approximately. But yes, as Ali mentioned before, that APC should not be a barrier for publication. However, we don't specifically give student discounts, but yes, we can work with you to see what kind of affiliations you have and then do a waiver depending on your country and many other things. But yes, we do have policies for lowering our APCs.
Wonderful. So here's another question on feedback. So can authors reach out to get informal feedback from the editorial team even before the entire work is ready? Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Yes, of course. And yes, we're more than happy to discuss research anytime. Like, it's our full-time job and we are really passionate. So we want to hear from you, either through the submission or through direct email. So on the slide, Ali shared the email. It's the general email to reach the journal is imaging@lancet.com. So please submit even just an idea, and we can discuss that and explain how to make it a good fit for the journal. So we would be happy to continue the conversation or answer any questions that we may not have answered today through that channel too.
Great. So, so there are a couple of questions that are a bit more specific about the types of studies that we'll consider. So I'll try to answer a few of these all together. There's a question about whether we would consider, outcomes and health economics evidence to support healthcare decision making, especially in the context of diagnostic or therapeutic modalities. There's also a question about whether we are interested in feasibility studies. We definitely are. We're interested in all those study types. Of course, we'll have to make our decisions on a case-by-case basis. So it's helpful to see the manuscript to be able to say yes or no. But in general, yes, we are interested in those study types. And the feasibility studies question asks whether they have to, meet the reporting guidelines. So I think all studies that are reported need to, or submitted, need to meet, as far as possible, the reporting guidelines that are appropriate for that study type. But of course, it's not totally black and white. If there's a good reason why they're unable to meet a particular criteria or criterion, then, of course, we have editorial discretion, and we might discuss that with you if there's some, an absence of particular and important information, we might ask you about that. Okay, this question is regarding how many weeks are given to reviewers to submit their comments. A very important question. Ankita, would you like to take that one?
Yes, sure. Ideally, according to a perfect timeline, the reviewers are given 1 week to submit their comments, but then it all depends on the reviewer availability. If the paper is complex, it might take some more time, and most of the times reviewers ask for an extension, which we do have to give because we want the best possible comments from that particular specialist. So on an average, I would say it's between somewhat 7 to 14 days.
So a question about preprints. Can prior publications on arXiv, which have undergone significant improvement, and new experiments be submitted to you? And can we publish on preprint servers prior to submitting to you? Pierre, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's we don't see it as a prior publication. So you're welcome to post in any preprint server that you want, and then submit to us in a slightly reformatted or expanded shape. We would consider that without any doubt.
So my hope that people from multidisciplinary authorship and readership. So this question says, I'm from a biomedical engineering background, and most of our works are submitted to IEEE transactions journals. When should we consider submitting to Lancet Medical Imaging? What should we do to make our engineering-based works more attractive for you? That's a great question. That's very, very thoughtful, actually. I think the main thing is that often the same results, the same findings and the same study type can be valuable for different audiences, just depending on how it's written and how it's framed. So if there's an important technological advance, making sure that that's front and center, that the imaging aspect of that advance is front and center, and why the medical community would be interested in that technological advance, I think, is making sure it's framed that way, and also making sure that it's clear what the potential clinical implications are. It doesn't need to be, oh, this can go into the clinic today, it's ready to go. It doesn't have to be, that that advanced, but giving some thought to what the next research avenues are to get this into the clinic, that would be very useful. I think if you have more questions, more specific questions, would like us to look at a manuscript, as Pierre said, please do email us. We'll be happy to take a look and provide a feedback. So we've got another question here. Are review articles only invited for submission? Ankita, would you like to take that one?
At the moment, no, it's not just with invitation. We are really open for de novo submissions. So it's not just by invitation. At the moment, you can submit to us and also submit pre-submission inquiries as well. But yes, there is no barrier for the time being.
Oops. Yes, that's right. We're happy to take pre-submission inquiries on both original research and review articles. So this question is there a requirement for the number of cases in the treatment group and in the control group? And I think this relates to, what sample size are we looking for in the study? So Pierre, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I think it's a complex one to answer because we receive a lot of different type of studies and on different type of pathologies and different applications. So we don't have a hard rule. I think that's the answer. We consider what is typical for the field, for the very field of the paper, and we adjust that. So we don't have a hard rule if it's a really small number of cases, but it's because it's a really rare pathology or because it's an imaging technique that's really hard to do, we would understand that and appreciate it, and maybe still proceed if we see the intrinsic value of the paper. And similarly, if you have a really high number of cases, but it's just standard for the field, it might not be a specific asset. So we really consider the specifics of the field, of the clinical application, and the imaging technique. So we take all that into account when we consider.
So here's an interesting question. Can experienced researchers suggest a special issue topic for a call for papers and then act as a guest editor to manage those submissions? So Ankita, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Currently, we don't plan to publish any special issues or use guest editors. It will be all done internally.
That's right. Yeah, the Lancet journals in general don't have special issues, which makes us stand apart, I think, from most other journal groups. So let's see. I saw. So here's a question about AI imaging papers. The question is strong clinical validation essential, or are methodological contributions also within scope? Now, I think here, this is a good example of where it's very hard to say off the cuff. It would be easier to see the paper itself. But I think in general, we are looking for the clinical validation. It doesn't, and external validation as well. If it's a technological advance, or even a methodological advance, that's great. We would be interested in that, but we have to see some clinical value there as well. So here's a question. Is it acceptable for a manuscript to list more than one corresponding author? And does the journal allow joint first authorship? Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yes, we do allow. So we let that be discussed within the author groups. So we just ask for an author form and explanation of all the author contributions. And if all authors agree that 2 authors are qualified for joint senior authorship or first authorship, we agree with that.
That's great. So here's a question about commissions. The question is, how can one establish or set up a Lancet commission on neuroimaging gaps and opportunities in Africa, or a commission on theranostics in Africa? These are great topics. A commission is a massive undertaking. I really can't overemphasize that. But if you have ideas for series or for commissions, then we would be happy to talk. Please email us and we can discuss these ideas and opportunities. So this question is, should manuscripts be written more for specialists or more for a broader clinical research audience? So Ankita, would you like to take that one?
Yes, sure. I think it all depends on what your manuscript is trying to address and who are you trying to get as an audience for your paper. For example, if your paper is dealing with some specific imaging modality or some specific AI tool and you want your audience to specifically focus on that, then yes, your manuscript should revolve around that. But if you have developed some tool that is integrating into some kind of imaging modality, which ultimately leads to some technological advancement for the broader community, then yes, your discussion needs to be revolving around that.
This question is a study about, would a study about healthcare policy related to imaging be suitable for the Lancet Medical Imaging and Theranostics, or should it have imaging as an endpoint? Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So yeah, we are part of the Lancet, and the Lancet group really has a strong commitment to health in general. So it goes through like the whole panel. So health as a endpoint, and also all that surrounds health. So you can think about health equity or environmental sustainability related to health. And so as a journal of the Lancet Group, we also have this commitment. So I think we would consider what you describe as a health policy with implications for health, even if its imaging is not directly an endpoint. But again, to better answer that, yeah, we encourage you to just reach out, and we can discuss and help you refine the message if we think it can be refined, or direct you to other journals that we think would be more suitable.
That's great. And as a corollary to that, there's a question around, do papers need to have a global perspective, especially reviews and opinion pieces have to have a global perspective, or can we focus on a particular country? And I think it's both. So global perspectives are fantastic, but sometimes they're not particularly granular. They don't get down into the nitty gritty. So if there's a study about a particular country or a review on a particular country, and it's a robust study based on a lot of good data, or there's a really important gap there that's being addressed, then we would be interested in that too. So we're not, both are good. So there's a question on, back down to more of the nitty gritty in the formatting. Is there a guideline for colors and fonts to be used in the figures, or will the figures be formatted by the team after acceptance? Ankita, why don't you take this one?
Yeah. In this case, there aren't any specific guidelines for fonts and colors. Our journal is about medical imaging, so all your figures need to be clear enough and in detail. But after post acceptance, our production team will take care of all the formatting stuff, because we need your figures in editable format when you submit your revised manuscripts. And yes, our illustrators will read all the figures and will make your images as pretty and clear as possible.
So here's another question that's more specific to types of study types. So the question is, are any long-standing oncology case or interesting clinical case which is treated with innovative radioligand therapy considered? breast cancer, 20 to 25 years history, et cetera, specifics on that case. Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So we don't consider case study. That's the one type of study we don't consider. We don't consider case reports. We want the highest level of evidence for publication in our journal. So we won't consider this type of study, unfortunately.
Thank you. So, sorry, looking at the many questions. Thank you so much for your engagement. This is really wonderful. I think we have time for a few more. So I was gonna answer a question about more about formatting. So there was a question about whether there are templates provided for formatting studies and word limits. So we don't provide any templates right now. There are instructions for formatting and structuring randomized controlled trials on the website, and also systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So those are great resources if you go to the website. And in terms of word count, for original research, the word limit is 3,500 words. But if it's a randomized controlled trial or a systematic review and meta-analysis, then we go up to 4,500 words. And all reviews have a word limit of 4,500 words. But I did want to emphasize that although we have this word limit, it's quite important. I think being able to convey your ideas and your findings concisely is very important. It does not have to be this short when it's submitted. So we would never reject a paper just because it was too long, unless it was too long and impossible to understand. But if it was just too long, we would still, if we were interested in it and it was novel, clinically important, and seemed to be well done, we would still send it to peer review, and then we would work with you to shorten it. So, oops. We've got a question on clarifying the estimate of the processing time. Could you please clarify the estimate of the processing time and the publication fee? Ankita, would you like to take that one?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, our APCs are waived off until September 2nd. After that, it's $7,800. But yes, there will be some waivers depending on your affiliations, and we can work through it. As for timelines, if I talk about an ideal manuscript, so it ranges somewhat from submission to acceptance. It's around a month. But it's given that the manuscript does well at the peer review, the reviewers agree almost instantly and deliver in time, and the authors come back with their revision in time. But yes, it depends. It may slow down at each of these steps and can take longer. And as for submission till acceptance, I would say it's somewhat between 2 to 3 months. From submission to publication, somewhat between 2 to 3 months.
Great, thank you for clarifying that, Ankita. So this question is about, again, imaging AI studies. What level of clinical validation or real-world applicability do you typically expect for imaging AI studies submitted to the journal? So Pierre, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So clinical validation or real-world applicability is key for us. We won't consider just a novel AI model that's just been validated in one center, in single center, retrospectively. We won't consider that. We want somewhere closer to the clinic and to clinical applicability. So yeah, we want a higher degree of that.
Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our time together. I want to thank everyone again for their engagement. We had so many wonderful questions. And I hope our answers were useful and illuminating. And I'm really sorry that we weren't able to answer all of the questions, but if yours was not answered, then I encourage you to contact us at imaging@lancet.com. And you can also visit our website and read our information for authors. There's lots of great information there to help you figure out whether we're the right journal for you and how to format your manuscript so it has the most success with us. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with many of you in the coming years.